welcome to Dialogue. As Iran's domestic situation gradually stabilizes, the country is facing growing pressure from abroad. U.S. President Donald Trump has openly backed protesters and hinted at possible action against Tehran. How likely is the U.S. to exploit Iran's perceived vulnerability? In what ways might it do so? Would such actions achieve Washington's objectives, whatever those objectives may be? And how would this affect regional peace and stability? Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me now are Ghanbar Naderi, Iranian journalist and political commentator. Also in Beirut, Lebanon, we have Sharmine Narwani, editor-in-chief of the online news magazine, The Cradle. And in New York, Nina Farnia, assistant professor of law at Albany Law School. Welcome to the show. So, Sharmine, I will start off with you. Iran has said that the situation now is fully under control. How is the situation domestically and externally? Please share with us your observation.
I mean, to be honest, we've been trying to reach out to our journalists in Iran and editors and experts and have been unsuccessful in doing so the last few days. So like many folks out there, we're depending on social media and the occasional interview coming out of Iran. It seems to us that, after the Iranian government cut off the internet and also disabled Starlink by and large in Iran, that things have subsided significantly. There was a view that the Iranian government had allowed these things to build up in order to observe and surveil those involved in these activities. I think there's no doubt that, and we've seen this in previous protests in Iran, that people gather for legitimate reasons. I mean, a crushing economic situation in Iran caused, to some extent, from outside, not just because of sanctions, but because of the active program to diminish the currency's value just preceding these protests, So, but then almost immediately, unlike other incidents in Iran like this, the Israelis, the Americans were really actively, openly fanning the flames. They were, officials from these countries were saying things like, they were doing countdowns to the regime fall, and they were admitting that they were there side by side with protesters. And we really have to be very careful. I mean, protesters are people who protest something, legitimate grievances. Rioters are a whole different thing. And, the Iranian foreign minister yesterday, Araghchi, was seen talking about the fact that they now have audio recordings of instructions being given to these individuals to shoot at security forces, to kill security forces, and if they were unable to do so, to kill protesters. Of course, you're going to say, well, that's what the Iranian official propaganda line is. No, we've seen this in Maidan in Ukraine. We've seen this in Syria, basically people shooting at both sides or one side in order to, create a conflagration. And never before in any of the previous protests have we seen Americans, Israelis, and Europeans go so hard and so openly at encouraging a complete meltdown in the country. But that seems more or less to have wound down, except for small pockets where obviously people are armed now, but from what we're hearing, there's only a few pockets of disturbances here and there, and they tend to be very small.
Right. Nina, if you look at the protests, is it political by nature? For example, as some Western media reported, like anti-government unrest or protests, or are economic concerns as the root causes of those, let's say, unrest there?
As Sharmine said, a few days before the protests began, the currency experienced a massive devaluation of something around 30 to 40%. This was an effect of the sanctions regime. It was intentionally devalued. I think a few days after that, a small group of merchants, their numbers were maybe in the thousands, in the low thousands, protested. They had very clear demands. The state immediately met with them. Those demands were met, and then, or they negotiated some conclusions. And then very shortly after that, the riots began. And one thing that's very important to understand about political activity in Iran, because we've seen this now several times, is that Iranian protesters generally do not burn down civilian infrastructure that they need, right? Legitimate protesters don't target infrastructure that the public needs on a daily basis, like hospitals, like banks. Once you see that occurring, then you know that either the US or Israel or both are involved.
Yeah, speak of that, Nina. Of course, we know that Trump, posted messages on social media, basically urging Iranians people, quote, to keep protesting, take over your institutions, help is on the way. That kind of remarks, obviously, it's the intention is very clear to encourage more unrest, right? And also, if you look at the post written by the former CIA, director and also Secretary of State Pompeo, Happy New Year to the protesters and the Mossad agents, standing beside them. So obviously, there's also outside factors from U.S., from Israel.
Yes, definitely. And there was a massive social media campaign, almost a watershed moment in terms of the mischaracterizations of the protests in Iran, the mischaracterizations of the demands, and then there was an aggressive effort to make it look like these protests called for the end of the Islamic Republic. And that was not true. And we know that because just a few days ago, there were massive rallies across the country. We're talking millions of people. They're saying these are the largest protests Iran has ever seen against the efforts of the United States and the Israelis. So it is clear that the Iranian public, by and large, supports their government. They may have critiques of their government. Every society does. But they do not want to see Iran turn into Libya or Syria.
But that is a good point there. Ghanbar, I mean, if you look at protests, I mean, it happens with every country, every government, basically. People, there's something they are not happy, they will go to the streets. That's natural. And if you look at the Iranian situation, of course, there's a water crisis, devaluation, hyperinflation. Yes, people are not happy with that. But also it has a lot to do with sanctions. Remember the snapback mechanism, September 2025, full sanctions. Basically, Iran would not allow to sell their oil. Of course, the revenues, and also if you look at the U.S. sanctions on Iran, that's since 1979, 40 plus years, right?
First of all, my sympathy and thoughts goes to the families of those who were mercilessly killed in the streets of many Iranian cities and towns over the past few days or so during the bloody protests. They didn't deserve to be killed. They didn't deserve to be maimed. They didn't deserve to be murdered simply because they were asking for their rights. Please accept my condolences. This is for all the long-suffering families of Iranians who lost their lives. Coming to your question, politics is not about who is right or who is wrong, who is telling the truth and who is lying. It's about interests. Here, I fully blame the crazy government of the United States and, of course, Israel for inciting the violence. They are specifically to be blamed for what happened to so many innocent lives that were lost over the past few days of protests. They ask the Iranian protesters to stay on the streets, knowing full well that they were not armed. At the same time, I do blame the government in Iran for importing so many terrorist groups and members from places like Iraq, Hashd al-Shabi, Hezbollah in Lebanon, and of course, Houthis in Yemen and Palestine. The Iranian government is also to be blamed for taking these peaceful protests so violently. We do believe that these people didn't, I believe that these people didn't deserve to die, because some Muslims, some Islamic crazy maniacs think that they inherit the earth, that they are the ones that should be followed. I do blame Islam. I do blame the sickening values that have been imported and enforced on the Iranian people over the centuries. We know that the Roman Empire manufactured the Islamic beliefs and values. They created Islam in order to defeat the Persian Empire, and since they successfully managed to do so. And since then, we have only seen bloodshed in Iran. Think about it. Not even one single Arab, one single so-called free Palestine protester anywhere in the world backed the protesters in Iran. Clearly means that they hate us, they don't like us. And despite the fact that Iran helped them so many times against Israel, nobody came to the streets to say that, okay, stop the violence against the people of Iran. Nobody came. Clearly it means that Islam has to go, not just from Iran, but from across the Middle East. We don't believe that with Islam there is any future in the Middle East. Islam belongs to the mosques. Christianity belongs to the church. They did that 500 years ago. I think we should do the same thing to Islam right now. Islam needs to go back to the mosques and allow the politicians and the elite to run the countries in the Middle East. Until that happens, we will see more people get killed. I'm afraid the situation is getting out of hand and it's going to get worse. Why? Because Israel and America want to attack Iran. And now what's going to happen? More people will get killed. We pay the price, and this is not what we were after.
Yeah, we will touch upon that later on, Ghanbar. So Nina, I want you to continue to comment on the outside factor, in particular the U.S. factor. Donald Trump canceled the high-level meetings with Iranian officials, until what he called the senseless killing of protesters stops. Then he said on Wednesday that the killing of protesters had stopped and that the planned execution would not go ahead. Of course, the Iranian side denied there's execution there. So many expect, the U.S. airstrike possibly against Iran could be imminent. What do you see? Are we going to see the replay of the so-called 12-day war against Iran?
It's definitely possible. American strike carriers are already on the move from different parts of the world. And it's notable that the day before the 12-day war began, Trump posted on his Truth Social account that they are open to and eager for more negotiations. That was just one day before the 12-day war began. So one of the key foreign policy practices of this administration in particular, though it's consistent across U.S. administrations, is PSYOPs, is the use of PSYOPs to confuse the general public and also to keep states around the world that it views as its enemies, like Venezuela, like Iran, even like China, on the edge of their seats. I also want to respond to the previous guest's comments. This issue is not an issue of religion. This issue is an issue of the changing world that we're living in now. As the nations of Asia become stronger and become more independent from the U.S. political and global system, the U.S. is becoming more aggressive. And as U.S. empire falls, it is falling quite quickly. It is becoming more erratic and dangerous. That is what is happening. That is why they abducted Maduro in the middle of the night and brought him to New York to stand trial for trumped-up charges. That is why they engaged in the 12-day war over the summer. That is why they're instituting these aggressive tariffs against great nations like China. This is an economic and political matter, not a religious matter. The Iranians understand that. They understand that they are facing the most violent, most aggressive empire in world history. And that is why the people of the nation came out into the streets just a few days ago to defend their government against that empire.
Well said that. Sharmine, thank you, Nina. Thank you for joining us. Let me turn to Sharmine. Of course, as Nina mentioned, the U.S. itself is in sort of trouble, let's say, domestically. Of course, the ICE, shot dead one lady and shot at another person in Minnesota. There were, protests ongoing inside the country. And they, of course, illegally, forcibly, kidnapped the president of Venezuela and held a trial inside the U.S. But now they are concerned with the situation in Iran. I mean, what makes them think that that's justifiable to bomb Iran or to intervene in the Iranian situation?
Well, I'll tell you, the Cradle in 2022 published a piece, and it's called The West's Plan B, Securing the Realm. And we believed that at a time where U.S. power projection was diminishing and the American economy and Western economies were struggling, spending as though they didn't have more debt than they'd ever accumulated in history, they were going to try to secure in the global South resource-rich or geostrategic nations, in a sense, secure a smaller realm instead of, recognizing that multipolarity was here. They would then do some nation grabs. And then, of course, Trump comes in, he's talking about Greenland, he's talking about Mexico, he's talking about Venezuela, he's talking about Iran, he's bombed Nigeria. This is the West realizing its days of global hegemony are over, and it's doing a resource grab, and it is violating all international laws and norms in order to do so. For the Americans or the Israelis or the British, for that matter, never ignore the British. They're usually in hands first. For them to talk about violations in any country is a laughing matter. It is a colossal joke. And you are seeing Americans realizing that. I want to say that I think Israel has made two very big mistakes in its last few years. And one of them was launching an unprovoked strike on Iran. At that moment, the tens of millions of Iranian people who had been propagandized to think like you should always just criticize your government, even if there was no reason to do so, immediately understood what others had been telling them for a long time. We're under siege, we've been under siege since the Islamic Revolution of 1979. You have to open your eyes. These are foreign interests that are manipulating situations in Iran and trying to fan the flames of domestic collapse. Those people switched. And this was a massive, massive gain for the Iranian government. I always like to say I've been to Iran many, many, many times, and I'd like to say that the Iranians have a national pastime. Like the British used to have a national pastime. It was going on strikes before Margaret Thatcher came, and the Iranians like to complain. And like everyone, they complain about things. But this Islamophobic rant that I heard from our other guest is just, there's no place for that in discourse. I have to say, now having lived in Muslim countries since around 2011, nowhere do I find more measured, better temperaments, better environment. For me as a secular woman to live in, okay, I'm sure there are pockets where that isn't true, but if you look in those pockets, they're usually US, Saudi, and Israeli financed and armed, okay? This government in Iran has come up in the United Nations. The UNDP has declared Iran, I can't remember the thing, a high on the economic scale, okay, a highly developed nation. This has happened in 40 something years. It wasn't the case before. If you go to Iran today, you have highways and you have metro stations and EV buses, okay? I think more electric vehicles than probably in the top 3 or 4 in the entire world. The pollution problems being addressed, the water problem, which is horrendous. This is an active government. It is an activist government in so many ways. If there is enough national outcry on an issue, they go in there the next day. I was once in Iran where there was a nationwide shortage of chickens, and literally people were getting in pickup trucks from the capital and driving out to the provinces. I don't know what he's talking about. I don't think he's stepped foot in Iran for a very long time. I don't mean to slam on you, but you slammed on something that is unnecessary in a credible debate. Anyways, I do think that the Iranian population has learned something in June, and they won't be able to replicate it. They won't be able to replicate their Massa Amini protests from the outside, etc., because the psyche has shifted.
Yeah, it's a big topic for another time. Now we have Dr. Sara Yael Hirschhorn, a visiting professor at the University of Haifa in Israel, joining us. So, Sara, welcome to the show. I think most of observers are expecting U.S. Military action. We don't know what kind of military action U.S. will take against Iran. Some say, something similar to 12-day strike. Some say, a decapitation, against Iran. Others would say like a sweeping bombing of the nation. What's your observation? What's going to happen?
I think, sitting here in Jerusalem, everybody is very anxious to try and understand what the Trump administration is signaling here, because I can tell you myself, I was up until about 4 o'clock in the morning, doom scrolling on Twitter and trying to find out from television news whether there was any possibility that the strike would begin last night in the middle of the night, which is what we saw during the 12-day June war. So I agree that action is likely, and Israel is on high alert. Military installations have been moved around. Iron Dome batteries have been moved to anticipate and prevent this and protect the civilian population in light of strikes. Hospitals are on high alert. The population in general feels that something is coming, but no one is really sure when and what that will be.
Of course, Israel, many people had talked about Israel. People see there's a likely involvement of Israel if there's a U.S. bombing of Iran. Do you see such a likelihood?
Well, look, I think right now Israel's biggest interest is staying out of this conflict. Obviously, it's supportive of its ally, the United States, and its ally, the United States, is supportive of Israel. But Israel, cannot be perceived as having a hand in what should and must be the natural and organic uprising of the Iranian people against their own regime. Obviously, there are anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about the involvement of Mossad or the Israeli government in this activity, but I think that Israel's biggest interest is actually to stay quiet and see what happens. It could be, and I would say that that's still very much in doubt. It could be that what could come after the current Iranian government would be to the benefit of Israel, but that's also very uncertain. There's no real sense of what a kind of secession plan will look like after the Ayatollahs may leave. So Israel is very much on pins and needles about what the future might bring. The current regime obviously has been extremely hostile, and I have to disagree with your previous guest who suggested that Israel attacked Iran unprovoked. In fact, I spent 4 separate incidents in a bomb shelter because of Iranian ballistic missiles that were targeting Israeli population centers. So I really can't see that as being unprovoked activity or unilateral activity by the state of Israel. But I think Israel really can't and won't be perceived as having a role in this or in instigating this, and it must be the will of the Iranian people.
Yeah, but of course, the Pompeo, U.S. former official Pompeo, said that Happy New Year to the protesters and Mossad agents beside them. What do you make of that, briefly?
I think that we all know the Mossad has been operating in Iran, but there is no concrete evidence, and unless Michael Pompeo, as a former Secretary of State, has access to classified information that I myself do not have access to, that Mossad has been instigating or operating or funding or backing this revolution. It does seem to be the organic will of the Iranian people who are really sick of their current regime.
Right. Let me turn to Ghanbar. Ghanbar, if you look at what's going to happen, I mean, most of the attention is on the U.S. now. The U.S. Probably they're thinking of like a replay of what happened to Venezuela, for example, decapitation, or that kind of neat operation against Iran. So, what do you have in your mind of what U.S. is going to do, and what's its possible impact in this region?
Well, if Iran goes down, the rest of the Middle East will go down. That's why many Arab neighbors are trying to stop America from attacking Iran. They know that they are next. They know it very well that if the Islamist regime in Iran goes down, Iran and Israel will be neighbors. That terrifies them. They don't like to see that. They don't like to see the Roman invention failing in the Middle East. They don't want to see that. They don't want to see a prosperous and peaceful Iran, a civilization that goes back to 7,000 years, rise up again. Because if Iran goes up and rise up again, there will be no future for Turkey and Saudi Arabia, let alone for other smaller countries in the Arab world, like UAE, Qatar, you name it, everyone. Iran doesn't like that. Iran doesn't want to be invaded by the United States. But now we are in this situation. Why? Because for so many years, Arabs exported their depravity, their crazy ideas, their sickening values and ideology to Iran, and now they are also going to pay the price. We saw so many people get killed because of Islam, and we will see more. And Arabs are going to be victimized too, because when you start burning your neighbor's house, I'm afraid your house is also going down, and it will go down. Israel is very serious about bringing down the Islamist regime in Iran. America also has the same agenda. Look at Trump. He might say something else, but trust me, he has other agenda in his mind. Why? It's not just Iran. It's not just the Middle East. After Iran and the Middle East, Trump wants to go after Russia and China. They are going to be next. Unless something happens to stop the bloodshed in Iran, unless something happens to allow Iran to act like a normal country, no sanctions on Iran, no military aggression against Iran or invasion, I'm afraid the situation is going to get worse. This is just the tip of the iceberg. The crisis has only begun. I'm afraid many countries, especially the Arab world, are going to pay a bigger price over the next few weeks and months.
Okay, Sara, so that's, of course, with the assumption that the U.S. will bomb Iran and probably, following their own schedule, that would be a successful one, like what they did against Venezuela. But Iran is a country with 90 million people, 990 million people. That's a large nation. What's the likely scenario if there's a military conflict? Iran says they are fully ready, to be prepared for conflict with the U.S., possibly Israel. So are we going to see, say, the regional-wise stability, peace will be affected as a result?
Well, look, I think we're already seeing the implications of this, that, Qatar has suggested that the United States should not be able to use its military base as a forum to launch strikes against Iran, presumably because it itself is worried about being drawn into larger military conflict. And we've heard, rumors or news reports that are, unconfirmed, but I think that there is some truth to it from general pattern in history that Saudi Arabia, UAE, actually not the UAE, other countries, all except the UAE, have petitioned the Trump administration not to become embroiled into a larger regional conflict. I think there's also just, a huge amount of uncertainty of what form that conflict could take. Would this be a short strike by the United States? Would this be a strike that we hear both in the United States and Israel, that neither the United States nor Israel would be interested in striking unless they could be assured that this would bring down the regime, because anything short of that would just embroil the region in war without actually changing the situation. And also what would come next should the regime fall. And of course, that would require more than just some kind of aerial bombing campaign. That would require defections by the military and otherwise.
Well, with that, we come to the end for today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also watch us on the CGTN app on YouTube. Thanks for being with us. I'm Xu Qinduo. See you next time.